Hello everyone. In this video, we are going to discuss about different types of exceptions. Of course, we have basically two different types. Two different types. So one is like predefined exceptions and user-defined exception. That is other category. But other than that, we have another two types of exceptions. Those are checked exceptions and unchecked exceptions. So what is mean by checked and what is mean by unchecked? And which exceptions comes under checked exception and which exception comes under unchecked exceptions. We will discuss those things in this video. So to explain about the types of exceptions, we will see exception hierarchy. So here we have a superclass that is nothing but the throwable. Throwable is the superclass for all type of exceptions and errors. So we have two different classes. Exception is different from error. So we have two different classes. Exception is one superclass and error is another class. These are all predefined classes. Now these are all predefined classes which are available in a package called java.lang package. As we know, lang is a default package. No need to import the statement in our program. Even if we don't import that, all these classes you can use in your program. So throwable is the superclass for all exceptions and errors. And coming to, we are discussing about exceptions. For all our exceptions, the superclass is exception. See, if you see here, what are the different classes we have? The main subclass of this exception is runtime exception. You just remember this. I'll discuss about this type later, okay, in detail. But the main subclass of exception is runtime exception. And what are the different exceptions comes under runtime exception? Arithmetic exception, null pointer exception, class not found exception, array index out of bounds exception. All these exceptions comes under runtime exception only. And other than this runtime, what are the different exceptions we have? Interrupted exception, IO exception, right? And so on. We have different types of exceptions here. So based on this hierarchy only, we are going to define about checked and unchecked exceptions. So we need to remember this hierarchy to define checked and unchecked exception. So throwable is a superclass for exceptions as well as errors. And coming to for all our exceptions, the superclass is throw. So exception and runtime exception is the main subclass of exception, and runtime exception is the superclass for arithmetic, array index out of bounds, null pointer, class not found exception. For all these exceptions, the superclass is runtime exception. Now, the first one is unchecked exception. So in the name itself, it is specifying that it is not checked, unchecked exceptions. So I told you in the last video, we have two ways. One is the Java handler will handle our exception, or else if you want, you can handle in your own way. So we have two ways. If you don't handle, the system will handle. If you want to handle in your own way, you can handle using all those five keywords: try, catch, throw, close, and find. Right? So now, unchecked means all exceptions that extend the runtime exception or any of its subclass are unchecked exceptions. So which exceptions comes under unchecked exceptions? All the subclasses of runtime exception. See, if you see this hierarchy, what are the subclasses of runtime exception? Arithmetic, null pointer, class cast, then next one, array index out of bounds. All these are subclasses of runtime exception. That means these are all unchecked exceptions. So coming to explanation of unchecked exceptions are unchecked by the compiler. That means even if you handle these exceptions, those are not checked by the compiler. That means whether you catch the exception or not, compiler will pass the compilation process, right? Even if you don't catch the exception, the compiler will take care of that. So it's your wish whether you want to handle this unchecked exceptions or not, right? So if unchecked exception is caught, then exception handling code will be executed and the program execution continues. So if you want to handle this exception, then you can handle in your own way. So with that handling only, the program continues. The program execution will continue. So if you don't want to handle that, you can leave that. The system will take care of that. Why? Because it is unchecked. It will not be checked by the compiler. So through compilation, it will pass that even if you handle or not handle. So we have seen in the last video, we have seen example for arithmetic exception. We didn't handle the exception in that, but the system take care of that. At the time of compilation, we didn't get any errors. But at the time of runtime, we got that exception details. Why? Because we have a default exception handler. So if unchecked exception is not caught, the Java interpreter will provide the default handler. That's what. So, but in this case, execution of the program will be stopped by displaying the name of the exception object. So that means at the time of execution, it will show the name of the object. Like if we got the arithmetic exception, so it displayed that. But of course, it cannot handle. It cannot handle in the sense, okay, that divider value is not like it's 0, you cannot perform this division, so enter one more value. It doesn't ask like that, right? That is not the way of handling here. It simply shows what type of exception you're giving. So only that, till that handling it will do. So unchecked exceptions are nothing but all the subclasses of runtime exceptions are called as unchecked exceptions, and these are not checked by the compiler. So compilation will be done automatically. Only at the time of execution, it will show what type of exception you are getting. Right. So if we see here, so these are all some unchecked exceptions: arithmetic, array index out of bounds, array store, file not found, null pointer, number format, illegal argument. These are all different types of exception. Like arithmetic, we have seen if we are dividing any value with 0, we will get arithmetic exception. Array index out of boundaries exception. For example, we are declaring an array. We are declaring an array with the size A of 10. That means you can store only 10 elements. A of 10. That means you can access from A of 0 to A of 9. But in the program, if you try to access A of 20, you will get the array index out of boundaries. See, array index is out of boundaries. What are the boundary values? 0 to 9 only, but you are accessing out of the boundaries, so you will get that exception. Then array store exception, like for storing, if we get any problem, like we will get array store exception, file not found exception. So if you're trying to open any file which is not available in your system, then we will get file not found exception, null pointer exception, number format. If the number is not correct format, for example, what we call, you're reading a number using read line method. Then you're trying to convert the number into integer, but you have entered the number value as hello. So is it possible to convert hello into integer? It's not possible. Then in that case, it will give you number format exception and illegal arguments. If you pass any illegal arguments, then we will get the illegal argument exception. Of course, we don't use all these things in our like normal programming. So whenever you want, you get this situation scenario, you may use these exceptions. So coming to this diagram, like all the subclasses of runtime exception or any class belonging to runtime exception comes under unchecked exceptions. So this is one example for unchecked exception. See, so A by B minus C, A divided by B minus C. So actually B minus C is 0. Here we will get arithmetic exception. So if we try to compile this program, we don't get any error at compile time. Why? Because it comes under unchecked exception. This exception will not be checked by the compiler. So here I'm not handling this. I'm not using any of those keywords. I'm not handling this. So what it will do, it will throw an exception. At this point, it will throw the exception. But no one is there to catch. Like in our program, no one is there. But the default system handler will take care of this. So that is one way. Using try catch, you can handle. And the other way is you can throw this exception. You can simply inform to your handler that in my program, I may face this situation, I may face this exception. You take care of that. So one way is using try catch, where I can write try catch. So at this statement, I will get the exception. So this statement I need to keep in try block. So from this statement, I'm keeping in try block, followed by catch. So this is one way. This is one way of handling. And what is the other way? If you don't want to handle, you should inform to your default handler. How to inform? So in this method, in this main method, this program may throw arithmetic exception, throws arithmetic exception. So in the last video, I told you about throws. If we have multiple exception, we use throws. But the other use of throws is to inform exception handler, default exception handler about your exception. But here it is also possible to throw the multiple exception. For example, throws arithmetic exception. In my program, I may get IO exception, then I may get file not found exception. So you can write any number of exceptions here. So you can throw multiple exception. But what's the use of this throws keyword here? You are informing to the default handler that in my program I may get any of these exceptions. So that is one way. If you inform to the default handler, what it will do, it will simply take care of your program. Of course, for some exceptions, like for unchecked exceptions, even if you write this throws keyword and the exception name, it doesn't care about that. Why? Because it is unchecked. Even if you write the statement here, it will not check. See here, no need to mention for unchecked exception. So this thing, no need to mention for unchecked exception. If it is a checked exception, we have two ways. You need to handle it. If you are not handling, you should inform to the system. So that is those are the three ways, two ways. But for unchecked exception, it's not necessary to handle the exception or to inform the handler. So it will take care of that. So examples are all subclasses of runtime exceptions. That are those are nothing but arithmetic exception, array index, and out of bounds, file not found. All these comes under unchecked exception only. So this is another example. So we will try to see some examples here, like we will try to execute that. So we will take the previous program only. So there is a exception demo. Right. So here we are not handling, we are not informing. For example, if you want to inform throws arithmetic, this is a predefined class, so you need to follow the rules. So this program may throw the arithmetic exception. So simply I'm saving this, then we'll try to execute this. Right? So there are no errors. We're not getting any errors at the time of compilation. And coming to runtime, we are getting about the exception. Now we will try to remove the throws. So I'm just removing this throws. That means I'm not indicating about my exception. I'm not informing about my exception to the default handler. So no errors in compiler, and we're getting the same about arithmetic exception. Now you can handle this in another way, that is using try catch. So in the statement, at the statement, I may get the exception. So from the statement, I'm putting all this code within try block followed by catch. So which exception we may get? Arithmetic exception. So the catch is a method here. It should have a parameter which matches with your exception, arithmetic exception. For example, if I don't know what type of exception I'm getting here, so you can simply write exception E. So why? Because exception is a superclass for all exceptions. It can handle any type of exception. Or else if you know the type of the exception, then you can mention that. Then what I'm doing, I'm just printing this object. What is this object? E. I'm printing, but I should convert this object into string format using toString method. Why? Because if I directly print the object, I cannot understand that format, right? You should convert it into string, then you can print that. So try must be followed by catch. So this is another way. So previously we used to throw this, right? We have thrown that exception to the default handler, but now you're handling that using try catch. I'm simply saving this. Now if I try to compile this, so no errors, and see java.lang.arithmetic exception divide by 0. So this is your handling. If you observe the before one, this is the system handler. So if the system is handling your exception, this is the output you're getting. This is the output. And if you're handling using try catch, and this is the thing you're getting. Okay, so that's your wish. If it is an unchecked exception, that's your wish. Whether if you want to handle that, you can handle, or you can leave it to system handler. But if you are leaving to system handler, that's your responsibility to inform to your handler. But as it is an unchecked exception, no need to inform that. Even if you inform also, it doesn't care about that. So this is about unchecked exception. Now we will see about checked exceptions. So next category is checked exception. Obviously, this is exactly contrast to the unchecked exception. That means these exceptions are checked by the compiler. Checked by the compiler. That means at the time of compile time only, we will get the error if you don't handle this. Handling in the sense, we have two ways. One is you can handle that using try catch, or you can inform, simply inform the system using throws keyword. If you don't do any of these two things, then you will get a compile time error. Why? Because it is a checked exception. So if it is a checked exception, you need to handle that, or you should inform to the system. Otherwise, you will get a compile time error. Right. And which exceptions comes under checked exception? See, all exceptions that extend the exception class. We know exception is a superclass. So all the subclasses of exception class or any of its subclass except runtime exception comes under checked exceptions. So I'll explain the hierarchy in the next slide. So this is definition which exceptions comes under checked exception. And next checked exceptions are checked by the compiler. So that's what, right? That definition, in the definition itself it is telling these are checked by the compiler. And there are two approaches to handle this checked exception as we discussed. What are the two approaches? One is using try catch. Using try catch, you can handle that. So try catch. Otherwise, you can simply throw that using throws keyword. So this is informing default handler. You are informing to default handler to take care of our exception. Otherwise, if you don't want to inform, you can handle in your own way using try catch. Right. So how to handle? Inform the compiler, or else you can handle in your own way. So those are the two ways. And which exceptions comes under checked exception? All the subclasses of exception class except runtime. See, any subclass belonging to exception except runtime exception. Why? Because all the runtime exceptions comes under unchecked. So other than runtime, whatever the exceptions we have, those are all comes under checked exception only. A few examples are IO exception, class not found exception, interrupted exception, no such method exception. So all these are comes under checked exception. IO exception, whenever you use IO package in your program, there may be a chance to get IO exception. Class not found exception. If you are accessing any class which is not available, then we will get class not found exception. Then interrupted exception. Mainly this will be used in threads. If one thread is using CPU, if another thread trying to interrupt the CPU, then we may get this interrupted exception. Next, no such method exception. This is also if you're trying to access any method, invalid method which is not available, then we may get no such method exception. All these are checked exceptions which are checked at the time of compile time only. So if you don't handle this or if you don't inform the system, then you will get the compile time error. So we will see one example here. See, I'm using IO package here. That means you may get a IO exception, which is a checked exception. See, I'm not throwing that. I'm not handling it using try catch. Then obviously at compile time you will get a exception. Which exception? IO exception. That means at compile time we will get the error. So we will try to execute this code. So exception demo3.java. So we will try to see the code. See what I'm doing, I'm importing IO package. I'm using an IO class called data input stream. Using this in object, I'm trying to read the data. So here actually we don't have any error, but whenever you use IO package, there may be a chance to get IO exception. So you should handle that. Why? Because IO exception is a checked exception. So exception demo3.java. So exception demo3.java. Now if I try to execute this, demo3. See, at compile time only we got the error. So what is the error? Unreported exception, IO exception. We have not reported about this. We have not handled this. We have not exception. See, must be caught or declared to be thrown. Must be caught in the sense you should catch that using try catch, or declared to be thrown. That means you need to throw that using throws keyword. So you need to do any of these two things, but you didn't do any of these two. So that's why you got the compile time error. So now we will try to rectify this. So what is one possibility? Throws which exception? IO exception. So I'm just saving this. Now if I try to compile now, see, I'm not getting any error, not compile error. See, this is not, you can ignore that note, okay? So we are not getting any compile time error. Why? Because we are handling. Of course, we are not handling. We are just informing the system. We are just informing about our exception. So what is another way? Instead of this, you can catch that using try catch. Try. So within this try block, I'm writing catch. Which type of exception? IO exception E. Then you can simply print that exception message. Right? So I'm just removing throws keyword. Instead of that, we have another way how to handle that using try catch. So within this, I may get the exception. Why? Because you're using IO methods here. So I'm putting this within try block, then followed by catch block. Then I'm saving this. Now if I try to compile this, so now also I'm not getting any error. So that means you have two possibilities here. Either you can throw that or you can handle that using try catch. But if you don't do any of these two things, you will get the compile time error. So this is about checked exception. If it is a checked exception, you need to handle that or you need to inform to the system. If you don't do any of these two, at the compile time itself, you will get the error. Why? Because it is a checked exception which are checked by the compiler. So which exception comes under checked exception? All the subclasses of exception class except runtime exception comes under checked exception. So So this is about types of exceptions, that is checked and unchecked exception. I hope everyone is clear with this video topic.